My name is David White. I work with MARI UCC, University College Cork in Ireland. And this webinar series comes from the PREP4BLUE project, which is developing methods and tools for mission, ocean and waters. And just again, I'll just give a quick recap on the context so that each one of these webinars stands on their own. The Mission Ocean and Waters is one of 5 EU missions. The other 4 are Mission Climate, Mission Cancer, Mission Smart Cities, and Mission Soil. And the thinking behind these missions is that the European Commission has picked 5 kind of grand challenges that European society faces at the moment, and has come up with a whole of society approach to solving them, setting really ambitious targets by 2030. So again, for Mission Ocean and Waters, the 3 major objectives are these 3 up here: protecting and restoring marine and freshwater ecosystems, preventing and eliminating pollution, and making the blue economy carbon neutral and circular. And underneath these 3 kind of grand objectives, I have down here the 10 themes that citizen engagement comes up in, and these are taken both from the Mission Ocean Implementation Plan and the 2 Horizon Europe call topics that the Mission Ocean projects has been funded through so far. And we'll provide links to those resources as well after today. So you don't have to read these now. I'll also send out the slides, and most of you will have already gotten them anyway. But so the aim of these webinars is we're taking the 10 target outcomes down below, and we're basing each webinar on one of them, how to work these into your activities, your ocean and water-based activities, and your project proposals. So to make sure that your initiative or project aligns with Mission Ocean objectives. And so in terms of looking for funding over the next couple of years, or working so that we're all working in synergy with each other, these are the kind of topics that we'll be working through. So again, sorry, I forgot to say, we'll just go back here for a second. We're just going to do a quick slide up as an icebreaker and just to see who's in the room today. So I have the QR code up here. If you can scan that, or you can go to slido.com, and if you type in hashtag MOCS, so for Mission Ocean Citizen Science, that will bring you to the Slido for today. So I'll just leave that there for 1 second. And we'll see who's in the audience. We've been asking different questions for anyone who hasn't been here, different questions at each one. In our first webinar, we asked what countries everyone's from, and it was really good to see a very diverse audience from Jamaica, from Morocco, from all over the EU. So yeah, that was fantastic, and hopefully we've maintained that. So today's first question is, what is your experience of working with marine or freshwater citizen science initiatives? And I can see that coming in very strongly so far is, I've never worked with marine or freshwater citizen science initiative. So that's interesting, because I mean, the other 2 options, just so you know the kind of logic behind the question, is either allows you to say that you've been part of a citizen science initiative yourself, or you've worked with them on a wider project. So it's just very interesting to see that that the most selected one is that nobody has ever worked in any capacity with a marine or freshwater citizen science initiative. And I think that's really interesting. It's good for us to know, and I think it means that today's webinar, it just makes the context of today's webinar all the more important, because citizen science, I think in terms of citizen engagement, if you look at Mission Ocean literature or funding call topics or anything, I think citizen science and ocean literacy are the 2 things that come up most often in terms of engaging citizens. And whether it's working with groups as part of projects, or you know, helping provide information on how citizens can get involved with them. So we're very lucky today to have a facilitator with a lot of experience in working with citizen science and science communication. And I'll introduce Jan properly now. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Sorry, where is it? And introduce Dr. Jan Says. So Jan Says is the head of science communication with Flanders Marine Institute in Belgium. He's chaired the European Marine Board Communications Panel, and he's a member of UNESCO's group of experts on ocean literacy. So, and aside from being a scientist, he is also a citizen science practitioner and he's coordinated 2 initiatives in Belgium. He leads the citizen science task for us on PREP4BLUE, and he also leads a public engagement task in the Mission Ocean CSA, which is Mission Ocean kind of overarching project in the Baltic and North Sea area called Blue Mission Banos. So Jan, thanks very much for being with us today, and we're very lucky to have you.
Okay, thanks David for the introduction. I try to share my screen first of all. Let's hope it works out well. Wait a minute. Boom, boom. Yeah. And hopefully you now can see my screen. Is that all right?
That's it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've been introduced already, and of course, work can only be done thanks to many colleagues. And
Jan, do you want to just make it full screen? So
yes, yeah. Of course, there it is. Okay. So thanks to many of the colleagues and other people from PREP4BLUE, this has been possible, and I would like to share with you some information and knowledge that might help you also in writing proposals or doing some citizen science or expanding projects. But before doing that, maybe just a small step backwards to when I was a child. Actually, citizen science felt already quite natural to me because my father was a biologist. He's still a biologist. He's still alive. And well, I was fond of newts and toads and frogs and all these kind of funny animals and reptiles. And so for me, it was very natural to make observations of these animals and share these observations already with a professor at the university. And so we sent him our observations, and I started dreaming of becoming a biologist. And I also started dreaming of making a thesis on reptiles and amphibians. I love these animals. Unfortunately, that guy was bitten by a venomous snake and he died. So the thesis never materialized, but I became a biologist. And not that much later, I ran into research and into seabirds. And again, there, citizen science was there. Because apart from counting seabirds at sea, we also collected corpses of beach birds on the beaches in Belgium. And if you want to do that, particularly on long stretches of beach, you need the help of citizens, of volunteers who want to help you in collecting the corpses. Corpses are a good indicator for instance, oil pollution or plastic entanglement and things like that. So yes, I worked with citizens quite a long time already, and I love to do that. And it's really good as a scientist to try to do that for many reasons, and I will come back to that later. Just to mention this one here, Beach Bird Service is one of the longest running citizen science initiatives in Europe since the 60s already, and it's giving also very nice data for policy. If you look at the graph, it shows how oil pollution in the southern North Sea has decreased over the past 40 years. So thanks to citizen science. Okay, but we are here to talk about citizen science. And of course, if we talk about citizen science, it's an umbrella term. We deal with a variety of ways. The public participating in science, that's the definition given by the European Citizen Science Association, ECSA. You can read more about that. They have 10 different criteria. What you need for citizen science is 2 things. First of all, 2 types of people that are citizens, non-professionals, that are actively dealing with research, and you need a partnership or collaboration with scientists or professionals. That's the first requirement. But there's a second one. You can have this kind of 2 groups together, but if it doesn't come to a genuine outcome, it's not citizen science. It's maybe public engagement, but not citizen science. So you need to have an outcome in terms of scientific knowledge, publications, data, maybe conservation action, policy change, and then you can talk about citizen science. What I will bring to you is based on several resources, and many of them are being developed within PREP4BLUE or are in the process of being developed. And the most important one will be the inventory. So we have been mapping marine, coastal, and riverine citizen science, let's call it aquatic citizen science, in Europe, all across Europe. And for the past year, I made that inventory, and that gives us a good idea on what is there, where does it happen, When does it take place? By whom is it being coordinated? And that's not the only thing, because we have a three-step approach. In May, we concluded also an online survey with more than 100 citizen science initiatives. So a selection of that group we discovered. And because in an online survey, you can go one step further. You can ask things that you cannot find in a web search. It's close, but I can only give you some preliminary results there. And the last step is the one that is being done right now by my colleague Line. She's also participating now in the webinar. And together with partners from PREP4BLUE in several countries, we are doing bilateral interviews with some selected projects to go even deeper in the why and the how and the do's and the don'ts of citizen science. So very interesting indeed, but too early to give you the full details. They will be available by the end of the summer, early autumn anyhow. Okay, the inventory, maybe just briefly sketching that this is a four-step approach with, first of all, a very clear definition. What do we consider as citizen science and what is the methodology we've been following? Then we decided to do a web search and a search on social media. Of course, in all the languages that you can imagine, because if you only would look for English terms, and then you will miss a lot in many countries. So we made sure we did that with a group of students with different backgrounds to have all the languages involved. And that ended up in creating an Excel file and a prototype database. That is, as I told you, not yet available. However, what I can already tell you is that we found almost 1,000 projects, only marine, coastal, and riverine citizen science in Europe. So that's an impressive number. We knew there were many, but this is even surprising for us. So it's a very good number to start with. When will the database be fully available? That will be by autumn somewhere. Our colleagues in PREP4BLUE are working on that. And when it will be ready, it will be a very nice tool. You can just see a preview. You will be able to search on projects, on topics, whatever. You will get some overview graphs and illustrations. You will be able even to add new projects. So that is coming soon. So keep an eye on that. And it's a really good instrument that you will be able to use. We also used, of course, other resources, such as some publications on marine coastal citizen science, some other work. We relied on the work we do ourselves in Belgium, coordinating, for instance, Sea-Watch B is a long-term monitoring project of the Southern North Sea in different topics, litter, but also biodiversity, seawater temperature, name it, archaeology, it's all there. We started in 2014, it's still running. And I will also give some examples of our big annual seashell survey, the Grote Schelpentelder in Dutch, the second example, because that's a one-day event, citizen science event, started in Belgium, now also in the Netherlands, in northern France, counting hundreds of thousands of shells, identifying them. So we also will give you some insight in those projects and the other ones that are mentioned there. Okay, what are the objectives of this Mission Ocean webinar? Well, hopefully you are in a position that you might have the dream of designing a new citizen science project, or maybe expanding an existing one. And we will try to provide you with some key information and some knowledge on where you can access more details or expertise. That's our goal. But before going into the details, what do you have to take into account? And maybe first ask the question, why do we make a distinction between marine, coastal, and riverine citizen science, aquatic citizen science, and the usual citizen science, let's say the terrestrial one, or citizen science in general? Well, first of all, of course, because we are dealing with Mission Ocean. That's the first reason. But also because we think there are some differences that you have to take into account. And one is that we are still not in the same position as terrestrial projects. So according to the European Marine Board position paper of 2017, I was one of the co-authors, citizen science is still predominantly associated with terrestrial projects. Okay, there is already some marine and coastal and riverine citizen science taking place, but to a lesser extent. So that's the first consideration. It's needed. to extend it, and it's happening. And I will show you a graph on that. But first of all, this one. So the number of existing projects is smaller in the blue area, the aquatic citizen science, compared to the land. And there is a second very interesting one. That is that if you take into consideration the huge area of a sea or an ocean, the enormous length of coastlines, this is very challenging for scientists, and the capacity of scientists is simply not enough to cover all these areas. And this is in a strong contrast with the popularity of these areas among the public. Of course, there's also a problem of accessibility. You don't go at sea as you would go in your own garden. But if you combine these 2-3 things, then you definitely see that there are opportunities to work with the public, not only because they like to stroll along beaches and discover rivers and etc., but also because if you can form a joint venture, you can also help the limited capacity of researchers at sea and on rivers. So there's a good reason to do that. And the third one is that there are very specific communities you can work with if you work in aquatic citizen science. Think about beach guards, think about fishermen, think about water sports enthusiasts, think about divers, and there are many more. These are groups you don't find in the terrestrial realm, so why not consider to work together? And I will also touch upon that later. This is the graph that shows, based on the inventory of the 1,000 initiatives, how strongly this aquatic citizen science is growing. Particularly since 2010, you can see it's an exponential growth. Of course, the last years, it looks like it's going down, but that's simply an artificial effect of looking at the starting date. And sometimes it takes time before you can find it on the web or on social media, but it's increasing. It's still increasing. And yeah, if you want to know how to get started and being one of these new projects, there are some things you have to take into account. One, and that's probably, I would say, one of the most important ones. Try to find a convincing, compelling story. If you have a significant element, a story that is really reaching people, that is really framing your work in a way that the public appreciates, you have a good chance of having a successful citizen science initiative. So it's always a balance you have to find between what you as a scientist, and I understood there are many scientists in the room now, you might think, okay, I would like to study this one and I need the public because otherwise I can't do it on my own. That's fine, no problem. But if your story is not convincing for those citizens who you would like to participate, it will simply not start, and it will be very hard to keep people motivated. So try to find a balance, a top-down approach as a scientist. That's what we would like to study, but also keep into account what a citizen would like to do, what's it in it for the citizen as a participant to your citizen science initiative. That has everything to do with motivation, of course. And if you look at publications like West et al., that looks at the motivations of citizens and citizen science initiative, environmental citizen science here, you see that what they stipulate as a good reason to be motivated is they want to do something good. The good cause, help wildlife, help nature, can be other things, and they want to contribute to science. They say it's a valuable thing to do, and the graph you see is not from West et al., but it's from our online survey, and that is showing that very interestingly also the coordinators of the project, because we didn't ask at the citizens but at the coordinators, they presume that their citizens in their projects, they do it because they feel like they do something socially and scientifically useful. Okay, they also want to gain some hands-on experience and gain some knowledge. That's also important. But for instance, they are not there to gain some certificate or monetary incentive. That's not why they do citizen science. So you have to find a compelling story that tells to your citizens that participate, this is good for society, this is good for nature, this is good for science. The organizers, if we ask the same question to the organizer, they say, okay, we can do more work together with the citizens. And very important also, we see creating awareness as a very good asset to our initiative. So they use citizen science as a way for outreach, actually, to spread the message of their research. That's quite interesting to know. So if you look at objectives, before starting an initiative, and you are a scientist, you try to find added value, of course. And probably you will try to do things that are difficult to achieve on your own, or with a small group, so you need the support of the public. Maybe you also consider working in an area that is otherwise not easily to get access to. For instance, I give an example from the terrestrial realm. If you want to get access to the biodiversity in a private garden, as a researcher, you are not allowed to go in every garden, of course. But if you work together with owners of private gardens, you can get that information. Maybe if you work in an aquaculture farm and you can work together with people working there, that you get access to a place otherwise you would not have access to. And of course, very important in your objectives, if you want to make sure that you end up not only with citizen public engagement, but with citizen science and good data, you need to have a proper feasible methodology. That's crucial. But don't forget for the citizens, don't forget the citizens when you set up something, because there should be something in it for them. That's very important. I just give a few examples. Of course, I cannot give all the examples. There are just too many that, according to my opinion, had a good balance in finding this top-down approach, a balance between what's in it for the citizens and for the scientists. All these kind of jelly watch programs, for instance. So programs in which citizens are challenged to go on the beach and to register beached jellyfish, take pictures so that you can identify, that you can look at distributions and temporal distribution, spatial distribution. Why is this a good example? Well, first of all, if you know something about jellyfish, you know that one day it's full of jellyfish and the other day there's nothing at all. So if as a scientist you have to plan a monitoring or a survey, it's very hard to do because you would need people every day to really make it work. And you need to do that on a very long stretch of beach to get everything collected. So this is a very good way where you can work with citizens. Moreover, citizens are really fascinated. Maybe sometimes they also fear jellyfish, and that's a good sentiment to get a good story and to get started. And most of these projects are still running and work quite well. They have led to good new policy, new science, even new species in science. So this is a good example, I think. Another one, also with a good story, is on labeling seafood. We all like to eat and consume things that are nice. But of course, sometimes in a restaurant, if you would eat seafood, you might think of, yeah, is that really Atlantic cod? What they say, maybe they use another species that is cheaper. There are examples of this kind of mislabeling projects, citizen science projects, where, of course, the scientist is doing the DNA analysis of the seafood, but he is or she is assisted by citizens collecting the samples in the restaurants or in their own kitchen. And this comes nicely together because it's of interest not only for the scientists, but also for the public. They want to know what they eat. We all want to know what we eat, and we don't want to be cheated. Good examples of stories again. Maybe you think, if I do citizen science, I work with the wider public. Okay, but what's the wider public? What age are you targeting? Maybe you would consider specific target audiences and groups. And I mentioned the beach guards, fishermen, water sports enthusiasts and divers. Well, in our inventory of 1,000 projects almost, we found out that 10% on average is dealing with these specific groups. Is that a lot? I think there's room for more. Particularly if you look at, okay, it's fine with water sports, divers and fishermen, but today we could not find one single citizen science initiative with beach guards. They are there on the beach. It must be very easy to convince them in one way or another to do something scientifically when they are just waiting for somebody doing stupid things in the swimming area. So why not trying to start up a project like that? Good other examples are, for instance, Plankton Planet. It's a French-based initiative linked to Tara Ocean Expedition, working with plankton worldwide. And well, they challenge sailors when they go at sea to collect plankton samples. And maybe you have the same experience, but at our Institute of Liz in Flanders, we often get sailors that come to us and tell us, yeah, we will make a big trip over this ocean, and we would like to do something of science for the good cause. And can you tell us what we can do? So this is a good example where sailors are challenged. Of course, they get all the kits and information and methodology they need, and they take the samples, and it's good for scientists as well, because they don't have to travel all those distances. So it works well. Another good example with a specific target group is with fishermen. And there are there are 20 projects with fishermen all across Europe we could identify. But in Belgium, we did also one with recreational fishermen. And there was a good reason for that. The reason was that you have the professional fishermen, and then you have those who are less regulated, recreational fishermen at sea. And the professionals said, they claimed that there was a problem. They said these recreational fishermen, they are unregulated, they are an unfair competition with us, they don't even know how much they fish. Huh? And we said, yeah, okay, let's try to find it out. Let's try to sit together with the recreational fishermen. Let's set up all kinds of surveys in the air, at sea, in harbors, and also look at logbooks, try to convince the recreational fishermen to provide us with the data in logbooks of what they catch, where they land their fish, etc., to come up with a final answer. And I can tell you that my colleagues who are doing that, this is a fantastic project, because they really not only got the data they needed to counterbalance that claim, because we found out it's less than 10% of the professional catches, that's one thing, but also we gained the trust of that group of almost 1,000 recreational fishermen. We work together closely now. And well, now it's like one joint venture. It's good, so it helps. Maybe you should consider working with schools. And of course, there is a lot of practical exercises being done in formal education. But very often, the practical exercises do not end with data that are recorded. So simply, they stop just one step before it can become citizen science. So I would say, look into that. And there is a nice publication, unfortunately, it's only in Dutch, on citizen science in the classroom. There are many assets and advantages of doing that. In school context, you can work in cross-disciplinary teams, stimulate global citizenship. I think I don't have to convince you that working with youngsters is rewarding. Don't underestimate also, you probably can work with large groups. That helps. School has a lot of students, and they will also try to get some outreach of what they do. So you get some extra exposure. On the challenging side, I would say, yes, data quality. Be aware with schools, because it's about, well, it's struggling, the data quality, with the idea of independent learning. For instance, in the STEM education, of course, students have to discover themselves how to do it. You don't have to bind them too much to methodologies, but if you want to have good and proper data in citizen science, you have to make good agreements. Don't think that schools have too much money to invest in citizen science, so probably you will have to find the funds, and you will have to provide guidance. So it's not something that you tell the schools, you do it, and then you hope good data will come out of that. No, that will not happen, but it's rewarding anyhow. Two examples that I would like to share with you. One very well known, I guess, is the Plastic Pirates Go Europe initiative. It's also a marine litter, and well, not marine, riverine litter project in Europe, also stimulated and supported by the European Commission. Started in 2016 by the German Aerospace Center, DLR. First in Germany only, then also in Slovenia and Portugal. And now it's already running in 11 countries. And of course, they want to Europeanize it and make sure that all over Europe, in the same way, same methodology, youngsters in schools can collect macro and microplastics so that we get good data for Europe. There is another project on litter that is also fascinating, Erasmus Maris, coordinated by I Am Sailing. It's a water sports based group of people working together with scientists, and they approach schools and teachers to co-create an approach to monitor and survey microplastics at sea and in rivers. Some very good things that they do is that they provide reference samples of microplastics to the schools so that they can already train on counting microplastics in a reference sample before they do the real sample. So in every project you will find good examples that can inspire you when you look for new things. And yes, if we look at the topics in the 1000 initiatives, there is a strong bias. It's also being published for Australia, the US, it's all over the world, it's the same. Citizen science, if you look at aquatic citizen science, it's mainly about biodiversity, species, charismatic species, whales, dolphins, seabirds, name them, a bit on habitats. And if you add pollution, marine litter is also coming up quite strongly. You see that this is really a very strong bias. So the rest of it, there's very little on fisheries still. Archaeology and history, we couldn't find many. We could not find one single citizen science initiative on aquaculture. That's very strange. So yes, try to think out of the box, I would say. I would like that some new initiatives go for some new topics as well. Although, of course, this makes also sense. There is room enough to do more projects on biodiversity, pollution, and the other things that are mentioned there. What is also an observation out of our mapping exercise is the level of engagement is very often rather low. That's not blaming anyone. It's not bad. It's also sometimes because the public do not want to be involved more. But it's a typical inverse pyramid you see, where 87% of the 1000 initiatives are working at the level of crowdsourcing or distributed intelligence. So meaning that the citizens do not have that much impact on the research question, on data analysis, etc. So I'm quite sure if you would come up with something, an extreme citizen science initiative that is really co-creating even a question you would like to survey, that you make a good chance to be honored and to get financed. Most of the projects we see takes between 2 and 10 years. I assume that many starts very enthusiastically, and after a few years, things get boring. It gets hard to find the funding. So I'm saying that not because you need to go for long term, but try to think about that very carefully before you start. There's nothing wrong about starting having a one-day initiative of citizen science and then stop. That's fine. That's quite easy. Make sure you have the funds, you have everything, you motivate your people, you do your outreach and communication, you do it. It's fine. But if you would go for a long-term initiative, you have to think properly. And I mentioned Sea-Watch, the Belgian long-term study of beaches and shallow seawater. And there we really looked into the feasibility of the program, because very often you are triggered in the beginning to say, we can measure this and this and this, and we also do this, and we take samples and we send the sample to the university. That's all fine. But if it's just too complicated and too much work for your citizens, I can guarantee you that in many cases it will stop after a few years, because you will lose interest from the citizens because it's simply too much work and effort. So for these projects, we made sure we only asked 2 hours for every sampling day, and we asked our participants to do 4 samplings a year. So that means 8 hours a year is the investment we ask for them in return for the investment in terms of equipment and training we do for them. That's thinking about feasibility on the longer term. The oldest project we have in our database is a wetland bird survey, British initiative. Started 1947, so 75 years ago. Well, this is, I would say, not the only one, because it's quite normal. This has happened even many years before. There are even projects in the 19th century where naturalists were collecting observations. And I'm quite familiar with this area of people, and I can tell you that without volunteers in this field, you will simply not have the data we have today. It's mostly amateurs, and very good amateurs, non-professionals, that collect data on birds, for instance, and on plants and on biodiversity. Without them, we would not have the same number of protected areas. So yes, citizen science is there for a long while. Financing, of course, a very important question, how you get things financed. If you have a good, compelling story, I'm quite sure you will find sponsors and you will be able to convince your director to go ahead with it. And so, but think about whether you go for the long term, or the medium term, or the short term, because for financing, that is really making a big difference. Make sure you have a good core team. You cannot do it on your own. Well, you can do it, but not on the long term, because you need to have some backups. If you fall sick, somebody have to replace you. You must make sure that you can respond to the questions of your public, and maybe you also need other expertise, expertise on communication, on coordination and organization, on data management, on research, of course. I think you need some research as part of your core team to make it all happen. If we look, for instance, also in our 1,000 projects, who is the main coordinator of most of the projects, we see there that universities and research institutes together with NGOs are the main coordinators today. They are the ones who started up, do the things, and that also shows clearly that there is room for more. Because, for instance, looking at governance and policy government institutes, there's not that much, 10%. If you look at industry, companies, they do not initiate citizen science. Why not? Why would that be impossible? Of course, there is also a community of citizens who are doing that. Museums, 3%. And if I look at aquaria, I couldn't find one. We couldn't find science centers there. We couldn't find libraries. Why is that? We do not understand there is room for that. Maybe they don't think about that. So I think partnerships can do something there. Have you considered inclusiveness, real inclusiveness? Working with hard-to-reach people, with maybe also gender-sensitive topics, and working with refugees, working with disabled people. Why not? Have you considered that? Well, we asked that also to in our online survey, and surprisingly is that, okay, 65% say no, we did not aim to work inclusively. And there was another group of 33, there's some overlap, that's why you cannot sum it up. But you see, the second group say, yeah, okay, we wanted to work inclusively, but they don't identify the target group. So is that really working inclusively, or is just saying it's open for everyone? But we did not really look into that in detail. So yes, there is room for that. There are good examples. Water Rangers in Twente, it's a Dutch town where scientists are working together with Ukrainian displaced families, youngsters, looking at water quality. Very nice project. This is an American one, but I would like to include that because they work with women and ethnic minorities, high school students working together with these groups that often are not included. And they look at stormwater management and water quality again in Maine. Many examples that show you how you can do that. Another thing that you will look into is whether you should use all kinds of tools, technology. And first of all, I would like to mention that this is not mandatory. So don't feel forced and obliged to do that. You can have citizen science without tools and technology, but of course, you must understand there is a very large potential today with all the technology that is there, and in the coming years it will increase that potential. You can do new parameters, you can make quality control and acceptance of data much easier. If you take a picture and that's analyzed with artificial intelligence, it makes life easier for you as well. And if, for instance, you work with pictures, It helps you also to do outreach and to do some visualization. So there are very good reasons to do it. And you see there in this graph that citizen science projects are more and more embedded in this emerging technology society we are, and we will become even more in the future. And that's also in line with what the European Union is wishing us to do, and to promote also apps for citizen science data. So they mentioned that clearly. So if you have any way to do that, take it into account. Some examples: CoSnap, the Australian example of a project where they challenge the public to use their smartphones. What they do is just having fixed stations, kind of a pole. You can fix your smartphone in that device, so that if you take a picture, it's always a fixed position. And then you just have to share that picture with the scientists, and they can look at the pictures over 1 year or 2 years or 10 years and look at the evolution of the coastline. It's a nice initiative using technology such as smartphones. And yeah, now there are, I think, 70 stations worldwide. We have 2 in Belgium. It's an easy one using technology. CitClubs is another one, looking at water quality, transparency, water color. That's, of course, is an indicator for pollution or for productivity of water, both inland waters and ocean and seas. They use an app, Eye on Water, that you can have on your smartphone, and you can take a picture of the water, and then you can compare it with the reference collection of colors of water. And why not inviting drone owners? This is a very new initiative. It hasn't started yet, so it's not in our inventory because it's will start in a few months' time. It's a Belgian one, where an institution, a scientific institution, is working with drone owners, so that they are challenged to use their drone to take pictures of riverbanks. Very often they are not that easily accessible. They can be very muddy and dangerous even to access. But with the drone, you can easily do that. And if you take pictures, artificial intelligence can identify macro litter. And so working together, you can have a very easy way, maybe on top of what Plastic Pirates is doing. You see, technology is evolving, and there are many more opportunities in the future. Should I say that communication is trivial and is extremely important? Some people say 95% of citizen science is communication. I'm not only talking about the outreach to the other world, but I'm also talking about the direct communication with your participants. It's really a continuous process of maintaining the openness you have. You have to gain trust and to keep the trust of your participants in every stage of the scientific process. So you work together closely. It's not scientists apart from the public. Try to work together, communicate about that. Another way to do that is training, providing training sessions. For instance, for the big annual seashell survey in Belgium and the Netherlands, we provide training sessions, both webinars and practical exercises. And why are we doing that? Not to train the entire public to identify seashells, but to have a group of experts that can help us to facilitate the day that we invite the overall public to do it. So today we have 80 to 100 people that we were able to train and identify the 100 seashells on Belgian shores. And it's not only interesting for the project, but it's also nice to see how enthusiastic all the younger people are working together, identifying seashells. It's really big fun. We love to do that. So think about training, very important. So after all, it's all about balance. Balancing what citizens want, what you want as a scientist or as a governor, people from working with policy, or maybe from the industry onwards. And it's about connection, building trust, and getting the motivation you need, keeping the motivation you will have for the future, building community. That's what it's all about. So try to provide feedback with your participants. If they send you the data and you wait 1 year to give some feedback, of course, this is not good. They will simply stop working because they will think it's useless. There's nothing being done with my data. share the knowledge. So it's not a one-way approach. Share what you have as knowledge as a scientist with them. It's a two-way approach. Make it fun. Why not? So there are many reasons to work together closely. Brings me to last part of this webinar and this presentation at least, and that's what about expanding an existing project? And what we know from the preliminary results for the online survey, where we asked coordinators, what topics do you need most information on? And we asked that for so practical information, both as some more content-wise information. The two on top of that were funding. Give us information on where to find core funding and to keep on going with the projects. And maybe you should consider the way Plastic Pirates is doing. So they started with money from the European Commission out of projects, but then more and more they try to give the responsibility to the cities and the towns, or the countries that are participating, that have to look for their own money. So empowering participants can be a way forward. And maintaining the citizen engagement, I understood that you had another webinar, some of you, and also a webinar organized by PREP4BLUE on motivation. So this is extremely important, and get this team spirit, use trainings where you can have. Some other things that can be needed is what we found out, that if for years on a row you keep on having the same story and you don't add any new content, it gets boring. If for the 10th year you have to convince citizens to go in his own private garden and to count again the birds there, well, after year 8 you will see that it's again the house sparrow and the blackbird, and maybe next year it's the blackbird and the house sparrow, but it gets a bit boring. So try to add, you don't have to replace it, you can go on with that, but add some small stories and anecdotes, maybe some new research questions that keep people going. That can help. Maybe add new target groups. It's not because you started working with the wider public that you cannot go for more inclusive, some added work doing with hard to reach people. Why not adding new partners when you are running a project that you have not been working together with, if they can have added value? Okay, I will not go into details of these two slides. It's just simply to mention that there are calls running right now. David, you provided us with these calls, and there are at least 3 where in red you see citizen science initiative or activities are being literally mentioned. On European Blue Parks, Atlantic Arctic Sea, Basin Lighthouse, European Natural Lakes. So there is definitely a demand for new projects having citizen science in it. So I would say, yeah, feel challenged and submit project proposals there. And maybe a very funny thing coming out of our online survey preliminary results is that we asked, was your project deliberately linked to the Mission Ocean or the UN Ocean Decade? And surprisingly, no. Most people say no. But okay, yeah. Some said it might fit into, yes, I agree. So if you would start a new project, make sure, particularly if you submit it in the Mission Ocean calls, that it's linked to the Mission Ocean, of course. That is definitely needed, and there is not that much today. So yes, let me end up with 2 statements. Europe cannot thrive without ensuring the best possible match between the immense potential achievements science has to offer and the needs, values, and aspirations of citizen science. So we need both groups to really make it done in our society that is quite challenged by many things like climate change, etc. And citizen science can make science not only more socially relevant, but it can also accelerate, enable production of new scientific knowledge. It can increase the public awareness about science and ownership of policymaking, and it can increase the prevalence of evidence-based policymaking. And I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope I've been able to give you at least some inspiration. And yes, this database, of course, will also help you, but if you can still wait till it will be fully accessible in autumn, that would be good. Okay, so maybe I hand over to David and Sarah again. There might be some questions maybe in the chat room.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jan. And thanks just for that. I think that was really practical, loads of examples and loads of ideas about how people and science institutions can work with citizen science groups. I think especially there's just a few key messages I thought that's kind of stood out. Like keep it simple but rewarding. And I think that's a major point. I mean, you know, in my experience, I think that is something in terms of citizen engagement in general that we tend to forget about, is that we think a lot about what we need citizens to do, but not how it will help them. And I think even in terms of the sales pitch there is important to think about to get that interaction. There's a few questions. I won't waste too much time talking myself, just so we can get to them. Just a comment at the start, I think, yeah, so for someone saying, yes, please consider using the term freshwater, not just riverine, as there are many schemes around lakes. I think that's a good point, and of course they're included. And I think just in terms of people who are hoping to work on Mission Ocean projects in the future, I think that's one thing that is apparent at the moment, is that the overemphasis on ocean as opposed to inland water. And so if you're designing projects, having a strong inland water presence in the project, I think will be looked on favorably. So yeah, there's two main questions here. One of them from Lucia is about, so that, you know, having citizen scientists involved as data collectors is kind of seen often, and I think your pyramid, you know, kind of depicted this. So she wanted to know, do you know anything about our projects that involve citizen science and analysis of data, and even tailoring future research questions? So maybe, do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about extreme citizen science for people who aren't aware of what that means?
Yeah. Okay. So the major thing about extreme citizen science is that before even starting something, you sit together with citizens, and that the main question, what do you want to research? What do you want to study? What is your question? That this already starts with what citizens want. So it's really the way you can shape also your society, because citizens have good ideas. They are living in the world, and they, of course, they see things around them, and they might have questions, only they don't have the tools, the equipment, maybe the funds to make it happen and to study that. So if you think you can just take, it's risky, because you don't know what they, and of course, if they say we want to study this, and you say, no, we don't want to, then this is not co-creation. So it's a bit more challenging, it's a bit more risky, but I'm quite sure it's extremely rewarding as a scientist if you can open up yourself to that risk of answering the questions of the public itself. And I'm quite sure that it is feasible more than we imagine, but it's just because automatically we look at what we see as researchers, and then we have some questions. Yeah, we can still do this, and we can still do this, and we might need some citizens, but the word need is already a very wrong word. You don't need them. Well, yes, maybe, but it gives a one-way approach. It's a top-down approach. It's not working together. Extreme citizen science is, first of all, sitting together, or even started with citizens, that they have some ideas and they come to your institute and they say, we would like to study this. Are you prepared to join us and to work on that? And then probably you go for a long way on extreme citizen science. Maybe they have ideas about how you have to treat the data. Maybe they have ideas, the citizens, about how to do the outreach, how to go to press, how to do whatever. Maybe they want to join you in writing publications. It's more risky, it's more challenging, but it's probably very much rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. And then I have a question here from Sunisa. Hi, Sunisa. How do you measure the impact of citizen science projects? And he mentions the MIX tool, the measuring impact of citizen science online. Or what methodologies do you use?
Yeah, it's a very good question, of course, and it's not only the question. for citizen science, but it's also the questions for every sort of public engagement. So I'm in public engagement now for quite a while, and I've heard it in many European projects all over. We all try to evaluate, to look at what is now in a quantitative or qualitative way, the impact of what we do. Of course, we all want to change behavior in one way or another, but changing behavior is not easy. And how do you measure that? So I don't have the answer, unfortunately, but what is clear, if you don't even measure in one way or another what your activity is having as an impact, you will never know it, of course. So try to install something, and if it's straightforward and not too complicated, it will help. Personally, I still find that if you do something and you just feel it, that there is a very good atmosphere and that you have this mutual social connection, this is telling you that you are on the right way. It's the same if you organize an event and it's done and you feel like, yes, this was good. This says sometimes much more than all kind of indicators you will have done, or surveys before and after an event, or a citizen science thing. You just feel it if it's good. But of course, this is not the way we really measure, so it's good to try to measure, but try to do it as best as possible. We have people who say, the Citizen Science Initiative has changed our lives. We have citizen scientists who now transfer the work they do to their children and even take their grandchildren with them on the activities. That's fantastic. That's impact. And I'm quite sure this will change their behavior. And that's the final step.
Great, thanks so much. We might just take one more question there to try and stick as close as we can to the hour. I've got one here off Karine Dubsky, herself a prolific citizen scientist. Karine, maybe I might be misunderstanding this. So Sarah, would you take Karine off mute? Is she, just in case she wants to come in on what I'm saying? Do you have any info on citizen motivation or actual effective follow-up action, for example, to find and halt pollution point sources or to protect a feature found by citizens? So is it on that, as in, Karine, do you mean that the citizens identify an issue and then it's brought to the attention of whatever it is, be it the local authority or whatever, and it's solved? Is that what you're looking for examples of?
Yes, we have really good examples of that. It's perhaps the most motivating. Mm-hmm. The citizen science gives the citizen the tools and links to law. They're really, really interested in law. And then the citizen has the confidence to say, well, actually, no, this pollution isn't okay, or we want this particular habitat to be protected.
Yeah, and thanks, Karen. Of course, we work together for the position paper for the European Marine Board, and I love what you are doing in your country. It's wonderful. I did not mention the project, of course, because I cannot mention them all, but it's wonderful. Keep going with that project, I would say.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed your presentation. Great. Super.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, look, I think we'll leave it at that for today. That's the hour now. Thanks very much. I might just mention quickly, if I can share my screen, and it works this time. Right. So we've got 2 more sessions left coming up. The next one is tomorrow, a community-based social marketing and introduction. Interestingly, one of the last points there was on, and the questions was on measuring behavior change and the impact of what you're doing thereafter. That will be dealt with in tomorrow's webinar. So anyone interested in that might like to come along. It's at 5 o'clock Central European time. It's just slightly later because our facilitator is Doug Mackenzie Moore, from the inventor of community-based social marketing from Canada. So we couldn't get him to get up too early in the morning. I think he's already doing it at 7 a.m. for us or something. So we're hoping to see many of you there. And just for everyone who's here today, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again, Jan. That was, like I say, really fascinating and a fantastic webinar. So I'll see you all soon and hopefully see a lot of you tomorrow for the 4th webinar. Cheers. Bye-bye.